Rumor has it that City Nerd might visit my city this summer. Even though I prefer the term geek, I'm making this video to try and influence his decision. He certainly won't come here because of the accessibility to fine American dining. So, how do you convince someone who's a nerd for cities to come to your city? I think you do it by demonstrating you have some good urbanism as well as some good data. At least, that's what I'm going to try here. I have seen academic papers that look at if shared bikes or scooters replace car trips, or if they replace other kinds of trips. The question on my mind is a little simpler. Are these shared mobility devices used mostly for a fun night out? If a quantitative look at shared scooter origin destination data won't convince City Nerd to visit, I don't know what will. And that's coming right up. This is Bike Nudge Nudge. Anything but weekly content about urban mobility and cargo bikes. Viewer suggested topics are welcome, but I've only ever had two, and those are both requests to review new bike infrastructure in my city. I'll get around to those reviews this summer, but the topic of this episode is of my own choosing. If you've been subscribed and following my channel, you may have seen me use R for spatial analysis. For transportation analysis in particular, I'm a big fan of R5R, but I keep seeing posts online about stplanr. stplanr? Saint Planner? I don't really know. I do know that the stplanr vignettes mentioned that the library is good with origin destination data, which meant I needed to go find some data. I went to my city's open data portal and downloaded the bike and scooter share data so I could experiment with stplanr. The bikes and scooters have a GPS on them so you can know where to pick one up. It also keeps the bikes and scooters geofenced, which means you have to have a lower top speed outside of certain areas of the city. Amazing that we have the technology to control the speed of a little rented scooter based on location, but that's impossible to do with SUVs. What are you going to do? I download the data and, while you could load 1 million rows into Excel, why would you do that to yourself if you know R? I'll put the code on GitHub and leave a link in the description in case you need help getting started analyzing micromobility data in your city. We're lucky that these data are fairly clean. I only have to reformat the date and break that date into some of its components. For privacy, the start and end locations are aggregated into hex bins. Since these are tabular data, not spatial data, the coordinates of the hex bins are stored in one column. The coordinates are in well-known text, so I don't have to do any additional cleaning before creating a spatial file of all the hex bins. Some of the hex bins are on Null Island, so I need to filter my hex bins to just the ones that are within my city boundaries. Now we're ready for the analysis. The first thing I want to know is when are the bikes and scooters being used. This graph shows that they're used most when it's warm in my city. Until this past winter, they weren't available in the winter months, and there was an extra long gap in 2023 as a contract was negotiated. We can also see that scooters are ridden much more than bikes. I don't have the data on the number of available bikes versus scooters, but I do know that using your own electric scooter in my city is illegal, so the shared ones have a novelty about them. Personal electric scooters are legal in the other major city in my province. Both cities say this is because of provincial laws. Make it make sense. Since scooter trips vastly outnumber bike trips, I'm only going to focus on scooter trips from now on. The thing I notice about this graph are all the short period peaks. Maybe there's something going on when scooters are ridden during the week. That brings us to our second graph, the number of trips per day of the week. Monday through Thursday have a pretty continuous number of trips, while Friday, Sunday, and especially Saturday have many more trips. Let's break down the daily trip data a little more to see what's going on. This messy graph now shows the number of trips on each day and broken down by the hour in which the trip started. Monday through Thursday are colored gray, as usage on those days was fairly similar. Friday and Saturday are red, and Sunday is blue. There's a tiny bump for trips that start between 8 and 9 a.m. on weekdays, which suggests scooters may be used for commuting to your typical office job. I'm assuming the rest of the trend during the day is just the middle of the days were warmer and more people were moving about. Weekday afternoons between 3 and 8 are pretty flat and soon tapered off. Maybe people are using scooters for the trip home or to go out for dinner. I'm just guessing. It's the weekend that stands out for me. People are sleeping in, so there are fewer trips in the mid-morning as compared to weekdays. Also, peak time isn't until later at night, between 7 and 10. This peak is nearly 50% more than the typical weekday peak. Those who are out having fun Friday and Saturday evening were making as many trips on Saturday and Sunday just after midnight as the typical weekday maximums. Last call for alcohol is at 2 a.m. in my city, and the number of trips really drops off after then. Maybe that's a coincidence. Now, they'll revoke my Geographer's Secret Society membership if I don't do some sort of spatial analysis, especially since the whole reason I initially downloaded these data was because of the spatial component. Let's map all the scooter trips by their start location. In these maps, you can see there are a lot more scooter trips that began in one hexagon and ended in another. But both maps show that most trips start either downtown or in this busy commercial zone on the south side. One reason is that the allowed zone for scooters is centered on these areas. Another reason is that these two areas are the densest, most walkable parts of the city and have the best bike infrastructure. I realize it's a pretty low bar for an area to be considered walkable in my city. Finally, let's look at the origins and destinations for scooter trips, since that's what started this whole analysis. The flow results show that during weekday mornings, there seems to be a more diverse origin-destination pairs, while during Saturday evenings, the trips seem to be parallel to the main two walkable stroads, or cross between them. This bridge is the main connection between the two areas, if you want to avoid the big drop into the river valley. The bridge is scheduled to be closed for a few years for maintenance, so I might need to revisit these data to see if trips change. If you go to the bother of analyzing the data yourself, let me know what conclusions you come to down in the comments. From what I've shown in this video, I've come to the conclusion that there's weak evidence that scooters are used as part of the work commute. There's strong evidence that these scooters are being used to enhance a good time out. I'm conflicted by this. You can tell from looking at me that I love a good time out, and the gooder, the better. But riding scooters on the sidewalk is illegal in my city, so you have to ride on the road. I wouldn't want a fun night out ruined by an unfortunate interaction with all the large SUV and pickup truck drivers on this stroad. I have some previous videos where I make the case for some high quality protected bike lanes here, and I'll accept sharing those protected bike lanes with a bunch of drunk scooterers if my city ever builds some. And that's all I've got. Maybe this video helps convince City Nerd to come here someday soon. I don't think riding a scooter drunk on a stroad full of alpha male truck bros who are all on their way to pick up a massive payload will trick City Nerd into wanting to come here. Offering a Backfeet's guided tour will probably just make the situation worse. I'll quit while I'm ahead.